Order. And welcome to the committee's fourth session in our inquiry into science diplomacy. At this very interesting geopolitical time, the committee wanted to look into the threats and opportunities facing the UK's international standing in science, and we chose to do that through four lenses: health, life sciences, quantum, and space. Today we're going to be hearing more about health from Gavi before turning to space. But our first panel, we have Dr. Sania Nishtar, and I shall ask you to introduce yourself in response to the first question, which will come from Lauren.
Lovely, thank you, Chair. Thank you so much for joining us today. Now, Gavi, for people maybe that aren't familiar, 1.2 billion children have been vaccinated around the world. And just could you tell us just a little bit about Gavi as an organisation and what its mission is?
Thank you very much. My name is Dr. Sania Nishtar. I am the CEO of Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance. Thank you for that question. Gavi is basically a public-private partnership. It's an international organization. It's based in Switzerland. And UK should be very proud because you were one of its founding members. Since Gavi's creation, 1.2 billion children have been vaccinated, saving 20 million lives and accruing more than $300 million worth of economic benefits to the society. As you know, immunization is one of the best buys in global health. Immunization has helped save more than 154 million lives to date, and Gavi has played a very important role. The background of Gavi's creation is important to appreciate because there was a time when the expanded program of immunization had driven up vaccination, saving lives, but then came a critical stumbling block because the costs of vaccines were very high. And that posed a serious challenge to access. And therefore, Gavi was established as a public-private partnership. We work with the pharmaceutical sector closely, including pharmaceutical entities from within UK. We crowdsource demand from half the world's children, and that really enables us to drive down costs dramatically, which allows more than 50 countries of the world to access vaccines. We have a very innovative model. We don't operate like a charity. Gavi pays and countries co-pay for vaccines as well. And ultimately, countries graduate out of Gavi's support. So it's not technically aid, it's like an investment. To date, more than 18 countries have graduated out of Gavi support. Countries as large as India and Indonesia have graduated out as well.
Can I ask you a little bit about that? So in the kind of the lifespan of how long Gavi's been around, these 18 countries that are now self-financing, what does that actually mean in reality? So does that mean that UK money or aid is no longer going there? How does it work?
So the countries that have graduated are totally self-financing their own vaccines, 100% self-financing from their own indigenous resources, and UK money does not have to be channeled to those countries at all.
Can I then ask about the benefits? So we have a lot of amazing life sciences in the UK. Have some of the formulations and discoveries that have happened in the UK, are they also helping the wider world?
Absolutely. Actually, UK is the crucible of innovation and science. And what we do is to bring your science and your innovations with humility to the world stage. You should be very proud that during the COVID-19 pandemic, the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine development was pioneering work. The modeling work that was done at the Imperial College resonated all over the world. I was then in the cabinet in Pakistan, and we used to have daily briefings on data from the Imperial College. GSK is the pharmaceutical company that we work with. We've purchased more than $3.9 billion worth of vaccines since 2010. Of course, there are many other critical science-based innovations. There are innovators working out of Cambridge, developing very innovative solutions to develop a biometric signature for children that don't have fingerprints yet. And there's a very long list of collaborations. GSK has developed two of the pioneering malaria vaccines. We ended last year by rolling out 30 million doses of the malaria vaccine in 24 African countries, where they are hugely welcome, and there's a huge demand. So there's a huge interplay of UK science and innovation into Gavi operations, and we are very proud of that partnership.
So, and certainly with the malaria vaccine, given that it kills children under 5, is just absolutely heartbreaking. So it's fantastic that those vaccines are getting out to those children. Do you feel, though, that given the political and global climate that we're facing at the moment, the cuts to aid in the UK, has that affected the global standing in which the world view the UK?
Well, we're very grateful that UK has maintained its support for Gavi, and that will really bring value for millions of children on the ground, and it will really help us to continue our critical work. We're very grateful and we're very honored that despite fiscal pressures, despite competing priorities internally, that the UK has continued to prioritize support for example, Gavi and the Global Fund. These are two organizations which operate at scale at the global level.
If I may, just one last question. There's seemingly misinformation and disinformation about vaccines and their amazing power of just public health and in essence, good health is allowing people to have good jobs, and it's a social justice point of view. Do you see in other countries this kind of suspicion or distrust of vaccines and vaccine technology, and what, if you do see it, what is the antidote to that?
Well, misinformation is a challenge, and it's a real challenge for us. And unfortunately, in the day and age of social media, there's an incentive for lies and misinformation and controversial matters to get amplified on social media. And that's something we are battling with. But the reality is that there is no decline in the demand for vaccines. We just talked about the malaria vaccine. There's effectively a competition in Africa who's going to introduce the malaria vaccine earlier. We are introducing the malaria vaccine in the 25th country in January, and this has been the fastest deployment in the history of vaccines. There's a huge demand for all the childhood vaccines, the new HPV vaccine, and of course the tuberculosis vaccine, thanks to British investment and science and engagement, appears to be on the anvil, hopefully in the next 5 years. There's a huge demand for these vaccines. Of course, misinformation is a challenge. We're battling it by disseminating the right information and by engaging governments and communities proactively.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lauren, and thank you for emphasising to us the appetite for vaccines in Africa and across the world, and I think that's particularly relevant on the day that the UK has lost its measles elimination status because of declining rates of measles vaccine, though that decline is to 95%. Now, I'd like to go to Freddie.
Thank you. I wonder if I could just follow in from what some of the questions my colleague was asking. What is the potential opportunity for the UK to lead on vaccines and global health in particular, given the political situation in the US? We've seen the US very recently leave the WHO. We've seen them defund Gavi, and we've seen unease and unrest at the CDC. So what opportunities are there for the UK to lead, given that the US is absenting itself?
I think there's a huge opportunity for the UK to lead, and the world is looking at you. You're a very important country, and through your Commonwealth footprint, you have direct engagement with so many countries of the world. You are clearly a world leader, and this is a huge space in which to step, because there's a massive need. Global health is not just relevant to countries in the south. Global health is equally relevant to countries in the north.
Yes.
With reference to health security. I published a paper in The Lancet 3 days ago, which was entitled Global Health Leap, an urgent call to action, in which I called for, respectfully and with a lot of humility, I recommended that the world needs a panel, an international panel, co-convened by a head of state from the north and a head of state from the south, because there are a number of different imperatives with respect to the next steps, the setting of objectives, the setting of the principles, getting alignment on the process of reform of the global health architecture. And I think there's a huge opportunity for the UK because it has the moral authority to do that also, because you've been such an important player in this space in the past.
If I could ask conversely then, what would the impact be if we had a new government come to power in the UK that was much more critical of investment in overseas aid, in the benefits of vaccine? There are parties within the UK that take that position. What would be the impact for global health and the UK?
I think you need to understand what value investments in institutions like Gavi bring to your domestic audience, to your electorate, to people in the United Kingdom. I think that's very important to understand, because an investment in Gavi is not just an investment in the future of 500 million children over the next 5 years, which is what our strategy articulates. It's also an investment in the health security of people in UK, because Gavi maintains the vaccine stockpiles for the world. To give you an example, back in 2016, when the Ebola outbreak struck in Western Africa, all hell had broken loose. Ebola spread all over the world. But subsequent to that, mechanisms were put in place. The Ebola stockpile was created. And now when there was another outbreak, nobody even heard about that. So I think your population, the general public need to understand that an investment in Gavi as an investment in health security, which directly impacts them, because we maintain the stockpile, because we have special financing instruments, firstly. Secondly, we directly engage with your commercial entities. The UK government gives us a contribution. We buy vaccines worth almost equal to that contribution from your pharmaceutical companies, which means an input into your economy, which means job creation, which means livelihoods. And that's a very important consideration for the general public. And then, of course, we help present UK's soft image internationally. You are the crucible of innovation and science. We give you market access. We bring that science to global platforms, which help save lives. That's a very important foreign policy consideration for any government. So for all these three reasons, an investment in an institution like Gavi is not just aid, it's not charity, it's an investment. And in the same vein, I'd like to mention that we are currently executing what is called the Gavi Leap Reform. And that Gavi Leap Reform is very aligned with your line of thinking on where international development should lead. So there are very many points of convergence. And I think as a former parliamentarian, I know that your first responsibility has to be to your own people. To people in your constituencies. That's how it ought to be. But I think we need to explain to people that it is in their benefit that the UK government supports institutions like Gavi.
Thank you. I mean, so you've answered my next question very eloquently, which was around what the benefits are to the UK, and I think you did an excellent job of explaining that. Yeah. So maybe a further question then to that is, what role can we as politicians have in communicating those benefits and ensuring there is widespread public support?
I think there's an art of communicating evidence and science into layman's language, and you have very sophisticated communication machines, and I think it's important that there should be public support for investments in institutions like Gavi, and people need to understand that it is for their own good, in addition to for the good of children in the world. But I think the science of communicating difficult, complicated, science-based messages and evidence into messages that resonate with the public is something that's entirely achievable.
If the benefits are, so high, and I think we broadly agree with that, especially as well if we're getting the money back through investment in our own pharmaceutical industry, then why do you think the government took the decision to reduce its funding over the next funding period to Gavi? And what is the impact of that? One campaign, for example, says that decision alone is going to cost 400,000 lives. I know earlier you sort of refrained from criticising the government, and I think you're in a difficult position given that the government funds you, but perhaps you could speak a little bit to that.
I think I have to be objective here, because I think, because I've also been on the government benches in my country, and I think when you're in the government, you have fiscal realities, and there are competing priorities, as your government does. There are fiscal realities, there are competing priorities, there are ongoing conflicts, there are some foreign policy decisions you've taken, there's the costs of settlement of refugees. But I would say, notwithstanding all that, the government really bent backwards to take out an allocation for Gavi. Yes, there were cuts. We wish there had not been cuts. But I think if I put myself in their shoes, I think they really bent backwards. And while we were engaging with them, we could really see that they were proud of their investments in Gavi, that they were really making an effort to continue to maintain. We were very touched by and very moved by the bipartisan support that we continue to see for Gavi. And I think in very difficult circumstances, the UK legislators, the UK government, and the legislators on both sides of the aisle came forward and made this contribution. We're hugely grateful for that.
One question.
Very quickly.
I'm really interested in what you're saying around the malaria vaccine. Do you think that will save money as well in developing countries? So, for example, from money spent on healthcare and treating those conditions, do you think that will be a good investment in those countries?
An investment in the health of children, an investment to treat a disease that kills children always pays off. And there are economic mathematical models that speak in favor of that. But I wondered if you've ever seen a child die as a result of malaria convulsions. It's a horrific sight. It's a horrific sight to see a child die because he's convulsing because of cerebral malaria. And to know that there's a vaccine that can prevent that is truly touching.
Beyond measure.
Yeah.
It's beyond anything that can be quantified. And I think you should be very proud that your science engine has actually delivered that vaccine. And you should be very proud of supporting an institution that brings its machinery into play, its shaping machinery into play, to make it accessible to all African countries that need it. You should be very proud of that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Freddie, and thank you, Dr. Nishtar. And as a baby, I did have malaria and malarial convulsions, and I remember my father describing to me just how terrifying that was as a parent. And obviously, I survived, but as you say, ensuring that no child should go and no parent should go through that again is a wonderful mission. Now, Emily, you'd like to come in.
So you've already answered a lot of the questions I had. You've set out very well why the UK public should care about this. Because of, well, not least, malaria is rising north. It is in Europe now, and if we can use this vaccine to effectively make sure that we're inoculating our own population, and we saw your very crucial role in terms of the COVID. And ensuring that pandemic that affected us all was as short as it possibly could be through the vaccination programme to stop the further mutations that we know we're extending its lifeline. You also explained quite eloquently about the return to UK PLC and why economically we should care. The third kind of pillar of this is how the UK can better use our science and innovation in life sciences through organisations like Gavi to have soft power around the world. And could you talk a little bit more about how our contribution to Gavi, our science and innovation going through that, is perceived in the global south, and how that benefits us in terms of our foreign relations ambitions, particularly in Africa?
Thank you very much. I think that it's perfectly justifiable for you to ask for better visibility in our areas of operation, and we proactively try to create opportunities for that. For instance, I was in DRC a month ago, and our host there, one of our hosts there, was not just the government but also your ambassador there. And I think we should look at other such opportunities to showcase your investments. We have an increasingly deep footprint in Africa. To give you an example, we work in 41 African countries. Previously, Gavi's investments, Gavi used to invest 57% of its resources in Africa. Going forward, under the Gavi LEAP reform, we'll be investing 80% of our resources in Africa. 500 million children have been of the 1.2 million children that we've vaccinated, 500 million were in Africa in the past. Now, going forward, given that 80% of your investments will be going there, we'll vaccinate even more. Some of our programs are exclusively for Africa. For instance, the malaria vaccine that we just talked about. There's another initiative called the African Vaccine Manufacturing Accelerator, which is a subsidy mechanism to promote commercial vaccine manufacturing on the continent. There is a history to this initiative. After COVID, during COVID, in fact, there was huge disenchantment because Africa was at the back of the line, and that should never, ever be the case again. So Gavi put in place, with the support of UK, with the support of our board members, the subsidy mechanism is $1.2 billion worth of subsidy mechanism to promote commercial vaccine manufacturing on the continent. This is an opportunity for your commercial entities to broker relationships. It's an opportunity for your private sector to deepen their footprint. And of course, you are investors in that subsidy mechanism. So clearly, there are huge opportunities through the Gavi machine, through the Gavi infrastructure, not only to create awareness about the excellent work that you've done in promoting routine vaccinations, saving lives, in making the world safe, in responding to the global health security threats in Africa, but also to be responsive to some of the political asks from the continent, and the African Vaccine Manufacturing Accelerator, in which you have a stake, as an example of that. We need to do a better job of showcasing. And of course, I can promise you one thing, as I sit at your table, that whenever I'm in a country, I will and do reach out to your envoy there and make sure that we provide every opportunity for your investment to be showcased.
Fantastic. So many committees across this House have expressed an increasing alarm at China's influence within Africa. Do you see our investment in Gavi as a way, and life sciences as a way of building a different kind of relationship with African nations than the more exploitative one presented by China?
Well, your country has a deep footprint particularly in Anglophone Africa, and your contributions are well recognized, and I think we should do a better job of showcasing your investments through instruments like ours, and there are avenues to do that.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much, Emily. Kit, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I just want to ask a quick question about what's coming next. Obviously, you've been part of the global campaign against measles that's had a huge impact, and I think quietly there are other diseases that you've helped almost eradicate, like neonatal tetanus. Which one is next as the good news that will be gone or near gone on your list? I mean, you talked a lot about malaria, but there are lots of other smaller diseases that will be closer to a kind of, we could say the world is like smallpox broadly, or leprosy, I think, broadly, or polio. Which is next on the list?
Well,
list of hope.
You're absolutely right in saying that the only time the world was able to eradicate a disease from the face of the earth was smallpox eradication, and after that we have not been able to do that. The second effort is around polio, and of course this is a multi-stakeholder effort led by the World Health Organization, and of course all of us have joined hands. Gavi has a huge interplay in polio eradication, and we will continue those efforts. We are close to the finishing line, so I think that would be the second disease potentially eradicated from the face of this earth.
Which one, sorry, did you say?
Polio.
Polio, right, okay.
And then, of course, there are cervical cancer elimination aspirations, because, we have a very effective vaccine against the human papillomavirus, which causes cervical cancer. It's able to prevent 90% of the cases, and it's a huge equity. It's a huge instrument of equity. Gavi was able to vaccinate 86 million children. We were ahead of our target as we closed last year over this 5-year period. So we hope that cervical cancer elimination would be another opportunity. We've recently launched the RSV vaccine as well, the respiratory syncytial virus vaccine. So there are new vaccines in the portfolio. There are older ones that have the prospects of eliminating the disease, and we're very thankful to your support, which enables us to continue our mission.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Nishtar. You've given us hope for the elimination of polio and cervical cancer, and you've also set out strongly how the work that you do is without price, if you like, while saying the return that the UK gets on its investment and how that impacts our country. The figures that I have seen say that Gavi has delivered $280 billion of economic benefits in the countries in which it's worked. Do you have an idea of how much, what the cost of that has been, what level of donations it is taking to deliver that level of benefit?
Yes, I mean, we work in strategy cycles, 5-year strategy cycle, and we've just concluded our 5th strategy cycle on the 31st of December 2025, where we've just commenced our 6th strategy cycle. And to give you a sense of the costs, our 6th strategy was costed at 12 billion.
Right.
11.9 to be exact. And we were able to secure, we are almost able to secure 10 billion.
Right.
And of course, we've had to recalibrate our programs downwards to be able to fit into this envelope that we have. So this is what a strategy cycle costs.
So for the 280 billion benefits that you delivered, how much overall has that? How much overall investment has that required?
I will have to add all the costs of the strategy cycle, and of course, I can come back to you offline. I don't want to quote a wrong figure.
Okay, all right. So I'm sure that the return on investment outpaces anything that the private sector can expect.
Oh, absolutely,
Yeah.
by leaps and bounds. So the return for every dollar invested, you get $54 in economic returns.
Okay, that's the kind of level of return I wanted to understand.
Yeah, that is the magnitude. You invest $1 in Gavi and you get $54 in economic returns.
Great. Well, thank you very much for your evidence this morning and for all the work you're doing, Dr. Nishtar. Order.
Thank you very much.
Order. And welcome to this, the second panel in today's Select Committee session on science diplomacy. And I'm very pleased to be joined by our two panelists. And I'm going to start off, ask George to ask the first question and ask the panelists to introduce themselves.
Great, thanks, Chair. Morning, both. Welcome. So we could be at a really exciting moment for UK space sector. As former minister, I look at what's going on around the world, and I see government, correctly in my view, announcing that the science and technology, the R&D budget, 3 big buckets: blue sky, Nobel Prize-winning science; secondly, growth; and thirdly, defence and sovereignty and security. Space traditionally has always, in my view, had a very sort of academic, sort of deep science, astrology legacy in the UK, but feels to me like this is a moment for the space sector to be recognised as completely central to the other 2 buckets as well. So I wanted to start by asking, does the space sector at the moment feel plugged into these 3 big buckets, to the new government strategic vision, to the industrial strategy? What's the mood in the space sector at the moment? Because it has at times worried about being not properly understood across Whitehall in what it can do. Is that changing? And are you now, perhaps I'd like to ask you both, feeling like a sector that is at the heart of the government's sovereign strategic growth security missions?
No. Is the short answer. I think, I'm delighted to give evidence this morning. I think space as a sector is a fantastic exemplar of the way in which you can deliver science diplomacy, be that in the provision of science to support our diplomatic efforts, so using Earth observation to support climate change discussions at COP, for instance, also for being a vehicle to enable those multilateral frameworks to come together. We remain part of the European Space Agency. I think we have a sobering result at the end of last year that I may come back to in terms of the UK investment with respect to our peers in Europe. And I think, space is a sector which is inherently international, and we have some very, very strong evidence of where space as a sector has endured our international diplomatic efforts. I'm thinking of things like the development of the meteorological system during the Cold War. The UK itself has in the past led some brilliant programmes, working in particular with developing countries, a programme that was launched 8 years ago, 150 million of public money, leveraging 650 million of private money. That was a fantastic success, and we've stopped it. And we've stopped it at a time when I think, most of us in the room would argue that we should be upping our efforts on the international stage, not retreating.
Yes, thank you. There's several things I'd love to come back to you on. You were distinguished chair of the Space Agency, so it'd be interesting to come back to that as well. But Graham, headline view in answer to my question?
Yes, thank you. So thank you for giving me the chance to give evidence today. Graham Turnock, I was the Chief Executive of the UK Space Agency between 2017 and 2021, working with Alice during that period. I've since been at the European Space Agency, and I'm now a visiting fellow to All Souls, Oxford, looking at space governance. So my answer to your question would be that I think space generally has an incredibly powerful role in those 2 other domains, so the economy and security. And we're seeing that globally with massive investments, recognising in particular the military and security potential of space. The Americans always heavily invested in it, but we're now seeing a huge investment by the Chinese and also substantial investment by the Indians and the Europeans. The UK has upped its investment in military space. A few years ago, it committed to 1.4 billion additional spend over 10 years, in addition to what it puts into Skynet, the communications satellite, which it spends roughly $1 billion on annually. But we are now seeing that dwarfed by the countries. The Germans themselves committed 35 billion euros to defence space spending in the autumn over 10 years. So that's almost sort of 3 times what we'd be spending annually. And in terms of growth potential, one of the big new areas that's coming through is satellite constellations, especially communications constellations. We have got an interest in the Eutelsat OneWeb system, but really the biggest game in town at the moment is Elon Musk's OneWeb. And there are other constellations coming on stream from Amazon, from
Starlink.
from Starlink. There are other constellations coming on board from Amazon, and again the Chinese. And I think the UK does risk being squeezed out of all of this at the moment, because our investment is not at the level of our competitors, nor are we as central to European efforts as we were before.
Thank you both. Can I ask a supplementary, one on the Space Agency and one on the UK Space Agency, and one on the European Space Agency and the European Defence. Perhaps, Graham, I could ask you about the Space Agency. Obviously, we heard the news in summer that it was being brought inside DCIT. I think the argument for that is, given the geopolitics of space and technology and SATCOMs, some quite sovereign decisions that have to be made. This is part of the sort of militarisation bucket, and that needs to be done in-house, not by a sort of arm's length quasi-academic body. Now, is that... Do you understand that logic? Do you think that is what's happening? And is the sector, through that internalisation, being plugged into new sources of defence funding and security funding? And Alice, I wanted to ask you about ESA and whether we're really getting our value for money there. But Graham, the internals first.
Yes, well, I certainly understand that that's the logic. Arguably, it didn't help when the sort of responsibility for strategy moved from the Space Agency to DCIT 4 years ago, and there was then a sort of separation, quite a bit of duplication of effort on the Space Agency and DCIT's part. So I can see the logic of trying to bring that back together within the department, and that will, I think, facilitate working relationships with the Ministry of Defence, which to my mind is absolutely critical, because if you look at all of the main spacefaring nations in the world, defence is the biggest driver of capability and investment. So if we want space to really keep pace in the UK, I think it has to be linked very closely to the MOD.
Alice, and that sort of links into the European ESA piece and defence. I suppose I'm really wondering, in the great European post-Ukraine defence surge, spending hasn't really happened yet, but the pledge to raise more and spend more, the UK part of that common shared defence, part of NATO, SATCOMs, you'd think that would be a big moment for the UK space SATCOM sector. Can I ask you to follow up your comments on ESA? We're obviously part of ESA, but are we part of that European defence SATCOMs technology piece so that we will benefit, our sector will benefit, do you think?
I mean, I think it very much comes back to the question you just posed to Graham about whether or not our decision-making structures are sufficient in the UK to take advantage of those opportunities, and the short answer is they're not. We need to stop considering space as a purely scientific endeavour. It does, of course, deliver scientific benefits, but, you know, the economic growth potential and increasingly the security, defence and foreign policy, there's a lot of soft power that can be realised through our international space efforts, and we've historically done very well on that. So to come to your question about Europe, again, we need to be humble. We had a latest round of subscriptions to the European Space Agency at the end of last year. The UK put 1.7 billion euros on the table. That was compared to countries like Germany, who put over 5 billion on the table, recognising what is going on geopolitically. Germany increased their subscription levels by 46%, Spain by 102%, France and Italy also increased. The UK was only one of 2 countries to decrease their contribution into the European effort. So I think we have to be very clear about that. Obviously, I am well convinced of the societal benefits of investment in space, and I would argue that those levels need to be higher. But nonetheless, we also have to be more strategic in our choices. For many years, we've, sown 1,000 seeds, and that hasn't been in our best interests. We need to sweat the money better, and I suggest that we do that by making some very strategic, intentional choices on the national capability that we want to deliver in order to be a meaningful international partner.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And that leads perfectly into my question with regard to where our capabilities and our strengths are. So the last year's modern industrial strategy from the government identifying the following space capabilities as priorities, and I will just sort of read them out. I'm sure you're all familiar with them. So space domain awareness, then in-orbit service assembly and manufacturing, Earth observation, position, navigation and timing, satellite communication technology, and launch. So those are our six strategic space capabilities. Are they the right ones? Are there others that we should be thinking about? And as you respond to that question, could you identify, leading UK companies in one or other of those sectors? So I'll start with you, Dr. Alice Bunn.
Thank you. So I suppose the short answer is I think it's still too high level. We haven't been as specific enough in the choices that we should make. So, for instance, space domain awareness is a very large field in itself. Right. Lots and lots of, scientific interest, lots of economic growth potential, lots of defence interests. And one could do anything from increased effort towards space surveillance and tracking, for instance. One could develop more efforts to the capability to interact with satellites. That could be debris removal, it could be in-orbit servicing. The one I would probably highlight as a no-regrets choice is space weather. So space weather is a risk, not a threat, but we know that we are due for a large event, and if we do see a big solar storm emerging, the sun has weather, just like we have weather, that would represent a huge risk to our critical national infrastructure. The UK can be very, very proud of both the academic excellence that we have, but also the fact that we've got the Met Office giving 10 years of operational weather forecasts, that we have a programme that we lead through Europe, but also relies critically on a partnership with the US. I believe that's an example where we should be doubling down and making sure that we secure the global leadership all the way through. So not just the scientific investment, not just the build, but the operational lead well into the future. And these things, it is worth saying, need decadal consideration, not just funding cycles.
Oh, great. So space weather is an example of a part of the Earth observation, which is identified as an industrial strategy, and you are arguing that we should be more specific in where we focus our efforts.
That's right, and sorry, just to be clear, it's looking out towards the sun, not Earth observation looking down at the Earth.
So where does space weather come in the six capabilities?
Space domain awareness.
Space domain awareness. Okay.
Awareness.
So it's actually
exactly. Yes. So recognising the fact that those orbits are getting increasingly congested, we've got more and more infrastructure up there. We need to do more to ensure the safe operations of that infrastructure.
Right.
And that is space domain awareness in the round, of which space weather is a key natural risk that we need to manage.
Do we have leading companies in that area that we should be building on?
And in the academic community as well.
Could you name some? I just want to make it specific. Can you name some leading companies that we have?
So there's many that would be involved in the production of the instruments. Airbus leading the build, yeah. But there are smaller companies that would be involved as well in some of the instruments, and as I say, we're already leading that effort through the European Space Agency programme.
Great, thank you. Graham Turnock, did you have anything to add in terms of where we should be specialising our capability?
Yes, just to observe that if you take space domain awareness and in-orbit service and manufacturing out of those six, and the four that you're left with do represent 95% plus of the commercial space sector. So there's not a lot of choice making going on with that list.
Right, so there aren't other big areas?
No, there aren't really other big areas after that. So then again, reading between the lines, I think it's clear that the strategy doesn't intend that we should do everything in each of those chunks, but it is silent on what we should do. So I think it is a good question as to where within those big chunks would we focus, and we've certainly got strengths in all of them. And mentioning some other companies, Astroscale is a very sort of strong company in the in-orbit service and manufacturing area, but many other smaller companies in addition to Airbus. But yeah, and the other point again is linking back to defence. What is the defence interest in these areas? Strong interest in satellite communications with Skynet, also potentially strong interest in space domain awareness and in-orbit servicing and manufacturing, because that also links to rendezvous and proximity operations, which is shorthand for really making sure others don't spy on you in space and having the capability of knowing what others are doing.
Thank you. I'm very keen for us to understand what the benefits and implications are of our strengths in space technologies for industry and for our communities and our prosperity. So, do you think that there is a mismatch, if you like, between our ambitions for the sectors as set out at a high level in the industrial strategy and the investment and the support that we are offering those sectors? I'll start with you, Dr. Bunn.
Yeah, I think, unsurprisingly, I think there is a mismatch, but I would reiterate it reinforces the need to make choices. I'd like to give the committee an example of where we made a very good choice. So I've been working in the sector over 25 years, back in the late 90s, as was the British National Space Centre invested in a programme for small satellite technology. We funded 3 satellites end-to-end. It was quite innovative at the time. People weren't building small satellites. They were building satellites that were, in some cases, the size of a double-decker bus. But what that led to is the fantastic success of organisations like Surrey Satellite Technology, and we've seen their success repeated again with organisations like Clyde Space, and for a good while Glasgow was the #1 producer of small satellites globally. So it is these long-term bets that we need to make. So as well as getting our level of ambition, our investment aligned to our level of ambition, I do think now we need to really make some choices. Okay. And as Graham said, so far we haven't really done that.
That's great. That's a strong message for us to take. I'm going to go to Daniel now.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good morning. I'm going to go back to the European Space Agency, and in your introductory comments, you described it as a sobering result, the contributions that we're making. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you think the main risks to our space capability will be from that reduced investment? What will be the impact of it?
Well, in short, we risk falling behind our peers in Europe, our competitors in Europe. So, as an example, the level of investment in the Earth observation programme was relatively low. Now, that's a decision that was made not least because the level of investment in 2022 was relatively high, I would say. But we do then have to reflect on what that means for the sector and what we might need to do to support the sector in other ways. Now, Earth observation, as an example, is very, very powerful, subject of this inquiry in science diplomacy, supporting our approaches to COP, for instance, and also supporting, our working with other developing countries. But it is also an area that is becoming increasingly commercial. We've seen some fantastic successes in the UK through companies like Open Cosmos, who are now really making a success of these Earth observation programmes. It's a point of reflection for the UK what we could do more. I suspect we could do more in regulation, something that hasn't come up yet. That's increasingly important when we consider that some of these technologies, in fact most of these technologies, are dual use in nature. So we need to provide those frameworks to enable the industry to make a commercial success where those capabilities are quite mature.
Graham, what do you think the implications will be?
Yeah, so just building on what Alice was saying about the Earth observation investment, which is the sort of standout reduction, although, as she also mentioned, others massively increased as well. So the other problem with not investing so much in Earth observation is it puts us in a weaker position then to get our share of the Copernicus contracts. So we have participated in Copernicus over this current 7-year period, but we're at risk of not getting the better roles or even substantial roles in those openly competed contracts if we're not investing in the ESA technology development stage, which comes before Copernicus.
Do you mind if I just follow up on that again? Because I think it's very relevant that, Copernicus system has been around for 20 years plus. When we were a part of the EU, it was natural that we paid into that system. I do think we've got, again, a level of strategic choice to be made. Sometimes we are being part of those big multilateral frameworks, and I think within European Space Agency it's very logical to remain part of those big science programs or the exploration programs where the scale of funding is such that you'd never wish to do that as an individual country. In other areas, we might want to develop our own national capability and play that into a bigger system. Other countries have done that for Copernicus. It's the model that Canada uses, for instance. And there will be other areas where we can think about different models and be, if I may, perhaps more realistic about the position and our influence in Europe.
And given that decision has been made, what can we best do to mitigate it, do you think, in terms of reducing the damage that you're describing?
In terms of the investment in the programme overall, I think we need to think about where we want to develop our national capability and our national priorities. And it's not one size fits all. I think it's important to be very intentional about how we deliver on our space priorities, because it depends on the objective to whether we'll want to develop something nationally, develop something through Europe, develop something through the Five Eyes partnership, etc.
And as the European Space Agency itself changes its priorities in terms of what's happening geopolitically, looks more at defence and resilience, does that open up opportunities for us here? What can we do to take advantage of that?
Yeah, perhaps I can answer that. So, one of the big new initiatives that was announced and partially funded at the Ministerial Council in November was this new European security service, Earth Observation Security Service. The UK's put in a very small sort of holding investment at this stage, but the programme is open for subscriptions for some time to come, and that's an area where the UK could decide to put a more substantial investment in. It's highly likely that initial ESA investment will eventually flow into a European-wide system, and again, depending on the UK's political comfort with Europe, we could be part of that system. But almost certainly, if we don't invest at the ground stage, we won't get into the sort of full system later. So that's something that I would suggest we should be actively considering at the moment.
There's that, and one of the benefits of our membership of ESA is the fact that we have access to the scale of technology facilities and expertise that we can use on a bilateral basis. Other countries do this a lot. It's something that the UK hasn't chosen to do in the past. We've instead taken decisions around participation in a wider European programme. But as a member of the European Space Agency, we also have the right to use them to deliver against our national priorities. So there's a bit of a further option there.
And in this changing situation, are you confident that we will retain our competitive position, or is it at risk now?
Directly, I think there are areas where it will be at risk, where we will fall behind our competitors.
Yeah, and the financing is the biggest risk, frankly. If others invest at the level that, for example, the Germans do, and we don't, I think it's almost inevitable that we'll fall behind.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Danielle. Samantha.
Thank you, Chair. I and Emily, actually, were really fortunate to do the Armed Forces Parliamentary Scheme last year with the RAF, which included probably one of my favourite visits, which was to RAF Fivingdales. And I think having the unique opportunity to see our capability and actually our unique positioning in terms of the coverage that we have from in our defence, and to touch on the relationship we have with the States and sharing data and insight was well, it was quite incredible. And I'd got a question prepared on how reliant the UK is on US capabilities for civil and defence space operations. And I'd love the answer to that from your perspective, but I'd also really appreciate it on the flip side. How much are they reliant on us?
I think it's such a good question, and I think we have to approach it with absolute humility, because the truth is we are heavily dependent on the US. I've mentioned it already. I think one area where we quite rightly have our heads above the crowd is in space weather, and we deliver, I mean, broadly, to look at that activity on the sun, you need to understand speed and direction. We lead on the production of one satellite, and the US leads on the production of the other, and we both need each other. So it's a strong area of cooperation. I suppose the second part of the answer is, despite the fact that the US has vastly more resources on the defence side in space than we do in the UK, we have geography. So Fylingdales is very useful to the US because we have that geography. I think we haven't mentioned launch yet, but I think the interest for launch is also around geography because of the safety considerations. You know, we can launch from the north of Scotland into a sun-synchronous orbit over open water, which is something that the US finds much harder because they find themselves either flying over North America or South America, and that's a tougher safety case. Launch is interesting. It's a very good example, I believe, of why we need to think about our investment in space across all of our interests. Yes, there will be commercial opportunity and economic growth opportunity from launch. My personal opinion is that it will only really thrive if we have interest from the defence community as well, because I think you have to look across the piece at the range of interests for us developing that capability for it to make sense.
Yes, if I can build on that, I mean, the US invests multiple tens of billions in military space annually, so it's an order of multiple magnitudes more than us. Primarily, we're dependent on them for intelligence, satellite information, for early warning. Obviously, Fylingdales is part of that system, but also for space domain awareness and for what they call conjunction warnings, which is basically warning satellite operators of the risk of being hit by debris. We're not alone. The whole of the world is very much dependent on the US there, although a lot of people are looking to develop their own space domain awareness. In terms of their interest in us, in addition to what Alice has mentioned, they're also quite interested in our small sat capability. They've tended to operate quite large intelligence satellites, so they've seen what people like Surrey Satellites have done with small satellites. They're quite interested in some of the video surveillance that we've demonstrated that we're able to do. And so there is some of the work that the MOD is pursuing in Earth observation satellites is definitely leaning towards US interests. But yeah, we are a very relatively small player compared to their spend.
So how would and we've seen quite a bit of this in the last year or so, how would a sudden shift in US space policy, such as President Trump's proposed cuts last year, affect UK's access to crucial capabilities?
I think I'm beyond my brief at this point. It's a question for the defence community. I could give a view, but I don't think I'm the expert to answer that question.
So what I would say is a lot of those cuts were to the Earth observation programme related to obviously climate monitoring. And on that, we do have a strong stake, as we've discussed earlier, in the Copernicus system, in the European system, which does quite similar things to what the US system does, not completely the same. There is some complementarity. So I would say probably we're not directly exposed to that reduction in Earth observation investment, but it is, a loss to the world as a whole, potentially over time.
So, just to expand on that, so are there any specific capabilities that the UK should prioritise to reduce our dependence on US science and equipment?
On the science side?
Yeah.
I think on the science side, I mean, there are some green shoots. Actually, we haven't talked very much about exploration or science, but it's worth noting that the UK scientist is, one of only 2 international members of the US Artemis Scientific Advisory Group. So we do still have enduring cooperation in those areas. I think it's the defence areas that would be much more difficult. I mean, we don't have PNT capability. As an example, we rely completely on the US.
Right.
I think it's a good example of where scientific cooperation can often, rise above the sort of geopolitical tensions, and we've got some good precedent for that. But I think on the defence and security side, we've got more cause to be concerned.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Samantha. Now, George, and then Freddie, and then Kit, and we'll run over slightly. So.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you both. I'm drawing quite a depressing but honest view that the UK space sector, I used to describe it as a Formula One pit lane. We didn't have a sovereign car, but there are plenty of cars in the space economy globally. We're a pit lane of amazing technologies, but I'm not getting a great sense that the signal is coming through, a demand signal that in this new geopolitics, where they're going to get pick up from. I wanted to ask about OneWeb particularly. I inherited the deal done in a way that I know infuriated Treasury and Foreign Office, former Prime Minister Johnson, and I think Dominic Cummings in a room acquired a controlling stake for 500 odd million. I inherited that deal and thought, well, I wouldn't have done it that way, but that's quite an interesting asset. And it seemed to me that as Europe had an ambition to build a constellation, we had an opportunity to play that in and secure some supply chain rights. We had a golden share. And even if one is sceptical that Europe could ever afford to build a Musk-style constellation, OneWeb owned spectrum rights, which were really valuable. The deal was in the end rushed through after I'd resigned, given my opposition to it. I just want to ask, where do you see OneWeb sitting now? Have my worst fears come true that it's been swallowed by Eutelsat and our golden rights have gone? Or is it still at the heart of an interesting opportunity for the UK?
So what I don't see is the UK government taking advantage of it as a strategic asset for their own needs. So I don't see a procurement strategy around OneWeb. And I know this can kind of make people feel very nervous, and we're very British, aren't we? And we don't like to interfere in the markets. And I think we lead...
For example, telephone services in the Shetlands and rural areas.
Exactly. Contrast that, and that's a decision. Contrast that, though, for instance, with the approach taken in the US recently, where, NASA decided that they wanted reusable launch technology. They weren't going to build it themselves, but they did put down the check to say, I will be your first customer for a technology capability that has not yet been invented. These are the extremes of the approach to supporting space. We are at the other end of the extreme. What we hear time and time again from the industry, and this applies to capability like OneWeb communications, but equally for Earth observation, for debris removal, for, you name it, a relatively low level of procurement from government can have a massive multiplier effect in attracting private investment. And we haven't had a procurement strategy for space capability.
Graham, OneWeb's rights, are they valuable in the geopolitics of this?
Well, my impression is, as Alice says, it's being managed as a financial investment primarily. On the face of it, it doesn't seem to be doing terribly well. The Eutelsat share price has just declined progressively over the recent period, and it faces major challenges in competing with Starlink.
Okay.
I think it does have potential, but not seeing it at the moment, and nor is the manufacturing of the next generation likely to be in the UK.
Okay, we need to move on now. So I'm going to go to Freddie briefly, and then Kit, and then we will let you go.
You Chair. I'm just wondered about the UK's exit from the European Union, Brexit, and then the impact it had on our space sector in terms of leaving Galileo, the EU's satellite navigation programme. What has been the lasting legacy of that?
The immediate legacy is that we left the programme in terms of our industrial contribution. We investigated the possibility of doing a UK position navigation timing system. The upshot of that, which I think was quite positive, was that we realised that the UK's own understanding of its position navigation timing needs were not very well developed. So a lot of work has been subsequently done to try and understand better what our own requirements are, which could in time, I think, lead to some demand signal towards the satellite industry again to provide a component of those PNT requirements, but I think it's going to be a slow process. I think the other impact is it probably has slowed down the Galileo system a bit, but ultimately it is now reaching full operating capability. It does leave us, though, in this position of being very dependent on the US system as the only assured system that we can rely on for military purposes.
Secondly, very briefly, you've spoken sort of at length around what space is in terms of looking at Earth and kind of a focus on UK specifically. I mean, those are the questions we've asked. But if I were to go to the public and ask, what do you think space is? They talk about exploring Mars, going to the moon, maybe the International Space Agency. How do we communicate to the public? And kind of, is there a gap in understanding around what modern space is and what Britain's role is?
There's absolutely a gap in public understanding, and that's what's held us back. I say it's the curse of space in many ways. In many ways, it's very emblematic and very visible. On the other hand, people think that is about missions to Mars and rockets and astronauts. And you go back to the original space race, and indeed it was very much about national prestige, wasn't it? It is no longer about national prestige. It is fundamentally the capability that enables us all to live our modern lives. But it's very much the invisible infrastructure in space. People have no idea that 99.9% of the data in a weather forecast comes from space. People have no idea that they use, navigation capability, all the time in their day-to-day lives. So it is a challenge because we're sort of competing against the, Buzz Lightyear impression, not to be facetious.
Let's not compete. Let's not
exactly.
compete with Buzz Lightyear. Okay, thank you very much. Kit, you wanted to come in briefly?
Yeah, I want to ask you, but before that, just to say it's very clear to me that the Starlink in particular are mucking about with their pricing on the basis that they're trying to choke off investment in competition by making themselves cheaper so nobody bothers. It's quite an interesting economic strategy by Mr. Musk at the moment to maintain his domination. You've talked a lot about opportunities in space and our participation in those, plus or minus. But obviously space also presents some threats. Do we as a country do enough to, on the basis we're talking about diplomacy, do enough to galvanise global effort around threats? Now, you talked about emissions from the sun and storms that will have an impact. And I've been to the Met Office down and wherever it is and seen the big glowing picture that they have of the sun constantly. But for example, we heard that we've downgraded our effort on planetary defence. While the Americans obviously have their DART program, an entire unit. What other threats are there? Do we participate? Should we? Is there more we could do to galvanise the sense that there may be, not little green men coming to shoot us, but the threats from space?
So we're still part of the. So the European Space Agency has a planetary defence programme. There's missions going out to intercept near asteroids coming our way towards the end of this decade. So we have a foot in that camp. My personal opinion is the biggest threat comes from the space infrastructure itself. That is, those operating orbits are getting increasingly contested, increasingly busy, increasingly likely to have collisions in space, which, if we're not careful, leads to basically a sort of exponential build-up of debris, which renders the whole operating environment unusable. There we can do much more, and we've got some real optimism in the UK in terms of the capability that we're developing. So for all of these things, you need the capability to approach things, the sort of rendezvous and proximity operations, and for debris removal, take it out of those critically busy orbits.
Is there an emerging governance framework around that or not? Global UN, WTO type?
So formally that would sit under the UN framework. In reality, it's very, very difficult to agree meaningful targets. The thresholds are so low. So that is why you see efforts coming from a number of different directions. People in this room know this very well, even from our own king, taking initiatives to encourage more sustainable use of the operating environment.
And are we in the lead in that diplomatically or not?
We could be.
So we're not. But in the same way, for example, because of history, Maritime law is broadly decided across the world in the UK. Same with aviation law. Every pilot speaks English for a reason. Right, all those kind of things, the rules of the road. Is there no way we can establish the rules of space as a UK kind of governed?
I think we have the potential, if we get to the point of having frequent court cases, of those being heard in the UK, because we've got a very reliable legal system. So it could be that jurisprudence, develops on these matters in the UK. I think it's harder for us to sort of set the overall rules, just because we are one voice and others are either very large, like the US, or banding together, like Europe.
Interestingly, the Earth Space Sustainability Initiative, which is headquartered in London, Lloyd's, is setting protocols. It's just set its 12th protocol. It's got 20 countries, self-regulatory.
How does that parlay into us being dominant in the same way we are in maritime law? I mean, if we can't own the teams or the players, we might as well try and control the pitch.
That's exactly what that is about. It's trying to do in space what we did in maritime.
Yeah.
I do think that we need to then back that up with those investment in the sustainable technologies that we need to sustain the environment, such as debris removal, such as in-orbit servicing, manufacturing.
So, thank you. Thanks very much. I'm getting a strong message from you that there's huge potential in space, but that we aren't making the detailed decisions about our capabilities necessary to help us realise that. And so, it's just a quick question for you. Do we have a strategy for space post-Brexit and in the era of US isolationism? Do you think so?
I think not. And I think the key is to get those decisions taken across a range of different governmental department interests. And don't get me wrong, this is fiendishly difficult.
All right. Okay. That's great. Do you agree?
Yes, I'd say we're not there yet.
And on sovereignty, which is a key issue for this committee, can we say we have UK sovereignty if we are dependent on US technology in the extent to which you have already defined? You both look puzzled.
I'd say we have relative sovereignty.
Sovereignty.
There are things the US need from us, clearly.
Right. Okay.
So, we're not in a sort of one-direction relationship, but we are very dependent on the US for many space-related capabilities.
And to add to that, I was just trying to work through what sovereignty really means. And if sovereignty really means that we have an independent capability to build and operate a satellite end-to-end across all those capabilities, then absolutely not. Because in the same way that we rely on the US, equally, there are some bits of the system that we will still rely on from Europe too.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We've overrun a little bit, but that shows the level of interest and the appreciation of your responses. So thank you for joining us this morning, Dr. Alice Bunn and Graham Turnock. Order.
Thank you very much.
Order, and welcome to this our final panel in today's Select Committee session on science diplomacy, where we're looking at space, and we're joined by Will Whitehorn. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself when you respond to our first question, which comes from Kate.
Thank you. Good morning. I wanted to put a question to you that was put to the previous panel, which is about whether the government is getting itself in shape to take full advantage of space. We're obviously seeing the merger of the UK Space Agency into the department, the sort of machinery of government changes. Do we look to be match fit for the opportunities that are coming our way or not?
No, we're not match fit at all at the moment. My name is Will Whitehorn, and I chair a Seraphim Space Investment Trust, which is actually the largest publicly quoted space investment fund in the world and is in London. And I've worked in this industry for a long time. I have never seen the state of government involvement in space to be as much in stasis and frozen as it is at the moment. I think there is actually, to use a cliche, we have a moment of clear and present danger to the United Kingdom. And we are not seeing government engaging in that. And I am seeing everywhere across. I was at an industry meeting yesterday where really there was a sense of depression about the current situation. We have a feeling that Nero is fiddling while Rome burns. We have a defence threat to the United Kingdom, much of which will come from space-activated activities, be it drones managed from space, be it rocketry, or be it the management of other assets from space. And we're not at the party at the moment to the extent we should be. We read every day in the FT about new contracts. The German government has only been in place for less than a year. It's created a space budget which is 10 times the size of the UK's overnight, within 4 months of deciding they needed a capability to be able to see through clouds at night and see what's going on in the north above Germany and Sweden. They've let those contracts to a company called ISI. We would have had an opportunity to be at that party, and we're not taking it because nothing's happening. I think our institutions for space, like UKspace itself, are well-managed institutions. Paul Bate, who runs the UK Space Agency, is very capable. I think in the chaos that's going on, we could lose him, and that would be a great shame for that institution. We have good investment bodies created by government in the past, like NSIF, very good investment organisation. Seraphim works closely with it. In other businesses I'm involved in at the moment, and in academia, NSIF is doing great stuff. The BBB is doing great stuff, but they're not supported by the framework of knowing where they're going to be getting funds from, because nobody is moving. The MOD is in stasis. Paul Tedman, who runs Space Command, an organisation I was actually involved in setting up. I was on the board of the RAF for 4 years, invited by the government to join that board to help set up that Space Command. He doesn't know where his budget's coming from. He doesn't know when he's going to get it, and they're having problems spending it. You're seeing in another Defence Committee today, debate now about not moving forward yet with the Skynet 6 project. I don't mind, as somebody who's involved in the industry and passionate about it, I don't mind who gets that contract. It's got to be let now. We can't be moving forward to another iteration of deciding whether or not we're too reliant or not enough reliant on one organisation or company or another. That was a contract that was let and it needs to move forward, for example. I think this is a truly dire situation that we're in. And space is so important to us. It's important in all the ways that Alice mentioned. I mean, I'll give you an example of why space is so important beyond the defence that I'm talking about at the moment. She talked about space weather as an event. We are overdue a thing called a Carrington event. Yeah. We will have another one. And we are overdue it by, in the cycle that we know scientifically, we are overdue it. If it happened on the scale that Carrington witnessed in 1859, it would wipe out a lot of our infrastructure. Britain is better prepared for that than others. We've had a project with the UK Space Agency called Vigil, which I lobbied for, and it's been a good project to do with ESA. But again, it's stalling at the moment.
Right.
So we must not allow these things to happen.
Yeah. So would you, obviously you think the merger of the Space Agency into the DESA is a backward step. Is that, I mean...
Can I come straight on to that? There is a problem, there has been a problem between policy and execution. Now, they're looking at the right problem. I don't know it's the right solution, but even if it's not the best solution, and everybody else seems to be starting independent space agencies just as we're merging one in, it is better to get on with it and get it done than be in the situation we're in at the moment. It was announced last August. The UK Space Agency has done its best to carry on getting involved in the projects it needs to be involved in the meantime. And I laud that. I'm not criticising the Space Agency here. But it's in a situation whereby it's got uncertainty that it's continuing. They're talking about April before the merger now happens. I mean, this was last August. In that space of time, Germany's just spent 10 billion euros on space defence from a situation of being elected as a government. This is I would say we're close to an emergency situation, to be honest.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Emily?
So that was very blunt, and I appreciate that, because I think you are reflecting some of the conversations that we've had. I want to focus specifically on some of the near space, particularly around MOD, defence. As Samantha said earlier, she and I were on the AFPS programme focusing on the RAF, and we had many opportunities to speak to those both involved currently in UK Space Command and those who on other bases understand the value of Space Command. It formed one page of the Defence Review, which I found quite disappointing. Do you think the government properly understands at the moment the interplay between space and defence and how our lack of leadership in this area is causing our country to be less secure?
No, they don't. It's as simple as that. It is quite clear at the moment that the priority is not being put upon getting the things moving. The budget for the MOD for space seems to be in stasis just now. I ask everybody in the industry who's working on contracts, and it's slowed down. There's projects that are interrelated to space. I mean, Tempest, for example, which is, the successor to the F-35B. Let's call it that for the purpose of today. We have a great deal of leadership and leverage. The F-35 A, B, and C aircraft, 35% of those aircraft come from the UK. It's a huge money earner for Britain, and it's a very successful aircraft. We could be at the heart of its successor, the next generation, using autonomy, management from space of assets. I actually just took over chairing a company called Sofant Technologies in Edinburgh, which has developed a K-band microwave receiver transmitter system that would be perfect for that and perfect for drones, so as they could be communicated with directly from space and communicate back. That company, all the interest at the moment, almost all of it, is coming from Germany and the United States. NSIF has invested in the company. They've been great. But when it comes to our MOD, their hands are largely tied. They can't move forward quickly enough at the moment because it is mired in a bureaucracy that others seem to be throwing in the dustbin around us in Europe and in the United States, because there is a threat from China and Russia in space and with related technologies of offence, which we can only counter if we do much more in this area much more quickly.
So picking up on Flying Gales, again, MOD capability, obviously it is the radar that covers all of Europe and a lot of North Africa, extremely important in today's geopolitical world, but it is just the radar. The analysis, everything else that comes off of the data collected is not done within the UK. Do you see that as a strategic weakness in our defence?
I actually think that's one of the lesser worries at the moment. We still have a strong relationship into that kind of data with NATO and as a member of Five Eyes, and in partnership with the United States that I don't think is under threat at this stage. And again, filing Dale is so important to that defence itself that if we were denied the data, I would imagine we would be denying filing Dales. Yeah. So I don't think, it's rather like somebody saying in the newspapers, well, our F-35s are under threat from the United States. Well, the same goes the other way. So a lot of these threats, I think, are kind of almost meaningless threats, one way or the other, to our national security. I think our national security is most under threat at the moment because we're not doing anything. Right. And not spending the money we need to be spending on the methodologies of defence. And also, I think, we need to be a leading spacefaring industrial nation. We have been traditionally, for quite a number of years, number 3 in terms of the number of space companies worldwide. We're 3rd in terms of the size of us. In the last year and a bit, we've slipped to number 5 that quickly.
Well, that's 2 places.
We've gone down from being the 10th most invested company by volume, and if you imagine all the volume that SpaceX took up, it was still a lot, down to number 17.
By volume
of money coming into being invested. Okay. Right. So these are real changes that have happened very quickly. And I have to confess, over a period of 2 years. And we need to show that we have an industry which has the support of government to lead, and the private sector will have the confidence to invest here. And there's a company that Seraphim's invested in the UK called UKspace. And they have just failed to raise money from the UK's National Wealth Fund and have taken it from the United States.
That's a very interesting case study. I think we'd like more details on that.
I want to ask about satellites.
Yes.
Satellites increasingly important both to domestic consumers and also militarily. We know the development in China around satellites. They very much, I think, foresee warfare within satellites and are developing satellites that can conduct that, as we know. We are reliant and potentially becoming increasingly reliant on Starlink for both telecommunications and military capability. Do you think this is a strategic vulnerability to the UK?
That's a very good question, the answer to which I don't think anybody could give you a distinct answer to that at the moment. I think Starlink needs competition, number one. Yeah. And it's going to be getting that from the US, and it's going to be getting it from China. And it could potentially be getting it from OneWeb. I think the British government needs to urgently review what is the purpose of its strategic stake in OneWeb, and how does it work with Eutelsat to make sure that OneWeb is at the party in any German contract for the kind of product that was announced only this week that they're looking to develop with a small satellite constellation in Germany. Because OneWeb is the possessor of the best spectrum in the world for operating this kind of system. Right. And it has some of the best technology. And we still have, this country, a strategic stake in it, owned by the British government. But if I try to find out what on earth's going on with it, I probably have as much luck as George would have, who's actually in Parliament and has been in government. I just do not know why we're not looking much more urgently and closely at that. Meanwhile, my colleagues in a number of large prime manufacturers, and I work mainly with the smaller new space companies, but a number of the prime manufacturers we were on a call with yesterday, and the current chair of the UKspace trade body, they said the problem we've got is they are literally rearranging the deck chairs at DSIT while this is going on.
Yeah. Right. Okay. Thanks very much. I think George wants to come in now, and then.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to ask. Thank you. You've been very clear. The dilemma for the UK space sector, it seemed to me, in a global race with China and America, is work out a niche. What does the UK do? And it seemed to me that Europe was going to build a constellation. We could be a provider through OneWeb of some of the bits of technology. But it also seemed to me that our leadership in the city, in finance, in regulation, in law, was a major USP. The global commercial space economy ain't going to want to be headquartered in Beijing, Moscow, or probably Washington. It needs a safe home, which is why I set up that Earth Space Sustainability Initiative. Tell me, you've been involved, Seraphim's been a great success. It was Lloyd's of London insured the first satellites. It's the biggest insurer of satellites. London is still a major financier of space. How quickly do you see this dilemma that you've described in terms of the industrial supply chain? Does it risk our role and leadership in finance and insurance as well, in those other London-based sovereign soft services, if you like?
Yes. All of this is at risk at the moment. One of the things that puts it at risk is the sheer scale of what's happening in other places. So let's look at SpaceX and its rumoured flotation. That has set alight the valuations of a lot of the new space companies which are already in profit in Europe because people realise how valuable these space businesses are. SpaceX's valuation is greater than the size of the UK economy for its flotation, potentially. It is larger as a valuation that they're putting on it potentially for a flotation than all of the US defence companies combined that exist today. So we are looking at a huge company that has been created because it's captured 80% of the entire launch market globally, and the launch market is exploding because satellites are doing more and more of the things for us above us than they've ever done before, and we are in the process of fully industrializing in space. There's an industrial revolution going on up there. We're putting data centers up. The first one is about to go up. And if we can move data centers outside the planet, that's a huge environmental leap forward. Space Solar, a British company, is currently, again, struggling with government to get anywhere, but trying its best to raise the money for its very unique and brilliant space solar technology to produce solar power for the Earth, for the planet Earth.
I think I'm hearing you say that we cannot rely on the fact that we've been historically an insurer regulator of if we're not investing in the technologies and the supply chain.
If we don't have an industry here, these functions that exist in the UK at the moment, for instance, Seraphim finds it pretty hard in current circumstances to raise money because the UK stock market, although it looks like it's on an all-time high, our pensioners are redeeming, what was it last year, 50 billion out of the stock market, and therefore smaller companies are not able to raise finance on the smaller new stock markets like AIM. And I think that all of this is a holistic problem. So when you look at UK as an investment centre for space, we have the best investment company in space here, but we're very small now.
So just to clarify, Joe, because there's a really interesting point that you're both making, are you saying there is a risk to the city's status as a financial sector if it is financial leader, if it is not a part of this industrialization of space and not helping to finance it?
Most definitely.
Thank you very much. That's a very important point, one which hasn't been previously raised. I do want to bring you back now to a point which we have discussed in previous panels and indeed throughout the inquiry, which is about UK sovereignty and particularly as it relates to space. Now, the previous panels have very much given us a message that there isn't a clear strategy, and that is for space, and that is impacting the decision making on which sectors to support, which etc. With Brexit and then US administration, if you like, isolationism, do we have a clear UK space strategy, and can we have a clear UK space strategy? And what would it be in your view?
It's a very good question and complex. So
You're
I'll
right.
try and keep the answer
Short and simple.
short and simple. Yes, we definitely need a UK space strategy, and none of the documents we've produced from a governmental point of view have managed to encapsulate one. The reason we need one is because of all the things we've been talking about today. Space not only matters to us because it's going to be the leading industrial sector of the future. It is where, if we are going to survive with 10 billion people on this planet, we're going to have to industrialise in space because we'll never reach net zero without space. It's as simple as that. People in the general public don't see it that way, as you said earlier, Chair. You mentioned the fact, and I think you mentioned, Freddie, as well, that we see space as the public, as NASA, rockets, ESA, exploration, and all those other things. We don't see it as the biggest industrial sector of the future, already employing 65,000 people in the UK before we even get started.
Okay. I think you've done an excellent job in setting out the importance of space.
Yes.
But I asked you about the key decisions that you like around our strategy. For example, do we align more with the Europe or the US? Is that a decision we need to make? I just wonder whether you had thoughts on what our space strategy should be, or how we could come to those conclusions.
I think we need to have a very close relationship with ESA, and we need to up our spending.
Right, okay.
I don't think in the case of the EU it's quite so crucial, but I think it's crucial that we work with countries in Europe, because, Germany is not doing it's not a European Union initiative by Germany. It's not a European Union initiative by Sweden to launch these very large contracts they've just signed up. These are initiatives that are more related to NATO. So, having a European defence based around the NATO that exists as it pertains to Europe is a crucial strategic aim, I think, for Britain.
Okay, that's very interesting. Talked about Brexit, talked about US developments. Obviously, we also have growing military competition in space from China and Russia, and we did talk about this a little bit earlier. So what sovereign capabilities do you think as part of the strategy, the UK needs to prioritise, to ensure as far as possible our national security?
Well, I think it's clear that China is probably developing right now the capability to neutralise other nations' satellites in space. Now, that doesn't mean destroy them with kinetic weapons, as in destroy them with missiles or some sort of bullet in space, because you're going to get a thing if you do that. One of the reasons there's not that kind of threat is what's called the Kessler effect. Mm-hmm. Kessler was a scientist at NASA in the 70s. You know about Kessler. He developed the theory using a computer model of what would happen if you started actually destroying satellites in some kind of Star Wars way. But China is developing the capability to neutralise them using electromagnetic weapons, let's call it that, and microwave. Right. And the UK could well be a leader in both countering those kind of things, because we do have capabilities at the deep research level to do so. And I think it's important that, again, this is given priority that's urgent. Not another inquiry, not another this. There needs to be budget unlocked for the MOD now.
Are you saying that needs to be a sovereign capability, so a UK capability or a NATO capability or a open source capability?
I think ideally it would be a NATO capability. And ideally, but the UK happens to have industrially and scientifically quite a lot of the tech. I mean, I've got 2 chips in my pocket. They could do the job very well. So
we love witnesses who bring chips in their pocket that can do the job. Yes.
And could certainly be useful for knocking out drones, for example, using electromagnetic effects.
Excellent.
And so I'm a believer in having a strategic policy for the UK in space which links holistically to defence and industrial strategy, and doesn't see space in isolation. Because space is basically, I mean, the GPS system alone, we couldn't feed ourselves without it now.
Absolutely.
So this is so important.
And as part of our global food security inquiry, we are learning, we are seeing that, and also as part of our daily lives, I think we recognise the importance of GPS. Can I just bring back to sort of the overarching, if you like, strategy, because you've talked about NATO capability. So are there any UK sovereign capabilities that we should focus on, sort of outside of our sort of alliances, and are there any particularly dual use capabilities that we need to focus on?
I actually do believe the UK itself, and it might now be necessary to cooperate with another couple of countries in Northern Europe, we should have a synthetic aperture radar capability to be able to observe the northern North Sea in the months of darkness and when it's covered in fog and covered in cloud. And the only way to do that currently is a commercial technology that the Germans and the Swedes are buying so as they can keep an eye on what's happening above us, over Iceland and beyond Shetland Islands, which we do not have at the moment. And we could develop that obviously with a commercial contract. We could develop our own satellite capability to give us that capability for the Royal Navy and the RAF to be able to observe what's going on in the seas north of this country of ours.
Right, and I'll come to George in a moment to ask our final question. I know we're keeping you a little longer than we said, but I'm getting the strong message from you that we need a strategy. We need it to reflect the realities of. We need a strategy. We already do have a number of documents, but they don't form the strategy that we need. We need it to reflect the realities of Brexit, of US, China, and Russia. Do we have, and this probably goes back to the machinery of government, but who in your view is the minister responsible for space and for delivering that strategy?
I don't know, in reality, because I think there are some very capable ministers in government at the moment, like Peter Kyle, who's now the business secretary, who was engaged in beginning to think about this strategy. But I think it's one that engages more than one department. Right. This is not a DCIT issue or a Treasury issue. It's an issue for all of those departments, none of whom are thinking in any joined-up way about it. And I think that from our point of view in the industry, what we want now is just some action on the things that are supposed to be being actioned. Right. Unlock the monies I'm talking about. So even if they're not the perfect decisions, like the DCIT Space Agency merger, let's just get it done so we can get on, and then we can develop a strategy. But while we're in this stasis that all my colleagues in the industry are talking about, right. Nero is fiddling while Rome burns.
Let me bring in a previous Space Minister.
Thank you.
George.
On that, our purpose is to help, support, challenge ministers and departments. I wanted to ask you just to close. You've been very clear strategically. Can you give us what would be your list of things if the Space Minister were here, or the Prime Minister?
Yes.
Tangible things you'd like us, having heard you, to push for to be done in the next 6, 9, 12 months?
Unlock the resources immediately we have, like the National Wealth Fund, and allow it to invest in this kind of activity in space and defence. Up the money that you commit to the British Business Bank, and let it commit more money to NSIF, both of which I consider to be well-run organisations. And for goodness sake, bring forward some kind of legislative approach to unlock the capability of the City of London to attract IPOs. There's a space company that may well float called ICEYE, based in Finland. They should be coming here to float.
Very good.
They shouldn't be going to the United States to float. And that is something we're not doing. So that holistic approach to strategy, which involves space, also involves finance, industry, and commerce in the most general sense.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Will Whitehorn. You have been very clear in your messages to this committee, which we like. You've also been very clear on the importance of space to our economy and our security, and moreover on the way in which we need to come together across this government and across the UK to use our international influence and our international relationships in order to build the space sector here and globally. So thank you very much for your evidence this morning. Order